She was a 30-year-old millionaire CEO trapped in a wheelchair, convinced her life was over, until a broke mechanic and his 5-year-old daughter rang her doorbell. The Texas summer pressed down like a heavy hand, smothering the air until even the walls seemed to sweat. The mansion on Lakeview Road stood silent and pristine from the outside, its marble facade gleaming under the merciless sun, but inside it felt more like a cage than a home. The air conditioner had sputtered, groaned, and finally given up hours ago, leaving only the oppressive heat and the low hum of insects outside. Madison Hale sat by the wide window in her wheelchair, watching the wavering horizon. At 30, she was the head of Hale and North, a company worth billions, but none of that power or influence seemed to matter here in her own house. She looked smaller than the tall glass panes surrounding her, her golden hair pinned neatly back, her brown eyes dulled by exhaustion. There had been a time when she thrived on constant movement, boardrooms, flights, late-night calls, but ever since the accident had left her paralyzed from the waist down, the world had shrunk to the size of her mansion. Days stretched endlessly in silence, punctuated only by the sound of wheels against the floor and the empty echo of her own thoughts. She stared at the useless thermostat on the wall, its blank screen almost mocking her. The stillness in the house was unbearable. She had been told to embrace patience, to find calm in routine, but there was nothing calm about the heat pressing into her skin or the memory of what she used to be able to do. She hated needing anyone. She hated the waiting most of all. The sudden chime of the doorbell startled her. For a moment she hesitated. Guests had become rare, and she never truly welcomed strangers anymore. With a practiced motion, she rolled forward, the chair moving smoothly over the polished floor. When she reached the door and opened it, the first thing she noticed wasn't the man standing there, but the little girl clutching his hand. The man looked to be in his early 30s, dark hair slightly mussed from the sun, his shirt sticking faintly to his shoulders. He balanced a large toolbox against his hip, shifting it easily as though it weighed nothing. His expression was careful, respectful, the look of someone used to entering strangers' homes and trying not to intrude more than necessary. "Good afternoon," he said, voice warm but a little rough from the heat. "Daniel Rivera, repair service. I'm here about your air conditioner." He gave a quick glance downward at the girl by his side and added with a half-apologetic smile, "And this is my daughter, Lily. Couldn't find a babysitter today, so she's tagging along. I hope that's all right." The girl was tiny, with brown curls pulled up into a messy bun and eyes full of curiosity. She waved at Madison without hesitation, her smile wide and disarming in a way only children could manage. Madison blinked, feeling the coolness of habit tug at her. She normally would have refused, kept distance, insisted on professionalism, but something about the sight of them, the weary father and the lively child, cut through her reserve. She gave a small nod, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. "That's fine." "Come in." Daniel stepped inside, the toolbox clinking as he set it down, his daughter skipping just behind him. For the first time in weeks, the silence of the mansion shifted. It wasn't broken completely, but it no longer felt like a prison. Instead, it carried the faint, unfamiliar promise of change. Daniel knelt by the control panel of the broken unit, his hands already moving with practiced efficiency as he loosened screws and pulled away the casing. The air inside the mansion was heavy, almost suffocating, but he worked as though he had done it 1,000 times before. Steady, unhurried, and calm. Madison sat nearby in her chair, watching him out of the corner of her eye. She had spent so long surrounded only by assistants, nurses, and lawyers, each interaction rehearsed and measured, that the presence of someone so unpolished felt strangely intrusive. Yet there was something reassuring about the way he hummed under his breath, as though the broken air conditioner was just another puzzle to solve, nothing worth panicking over. Meanwhile, Lily had taken complete possession of the vast living room. To the little girl, the mansion wasn't intimidating or cold. It was a castle. Her small shoes tapped against the marble as she wandered, peering at high shelves, trailing her fingers across the carved wood of the furniture. She moved with the energy of someone seeing endless possibilities in every corner. Eventually, she paused by a coffee table where a paper crown, likely folded from bright craft paper at school, sat slightly crumpled in her bag. She pulled it out with pride as though unveiling treasure. Without hesitation, Lily crossed the room to where Madison sat. The girl studied her seriously, head tilted to the side, and then, with the solemnity of a child who believes entirely in the importance of her gesture, she placed the crown gently on Madison's head. There, Lily said, nodding in satisfaction. Now you're a queen. For a moment, Madison couldn't breathe. The paper crown was so light she could barely feel it, but the weight of the words pressed directly into her chest. She had been called many things in her life: CEO, visionary, Iron Lady, competitor, but never queen. Not like this. Not in a way that carried no demand, no expectation, only pure, childlike truth. Madison's lips curved into a smile before she even realized it. It was small, tentative, but real. She reached up with uncertain fingers, brushing against the fragile crown. People usually call me the chief executive officer, she said softly, her voice touched with irony. It's a little less magical than queen. Lily shook her head so fiercely that her bun slipped sideways. Queen sounds better. Queens are brave. Queens are kind. You look like one. The words pierced through Madison's armor more than any boardroom victory ever had. She felt a sting in her throat and blinked hard to chase it away. How long had it been since someone saw her as more than her position, more than her chair, more than the tragedy stamped on her life? From the floor, Daniel glanced over his shoulder at the exchange. He caught the way Madison was smiling, hesitant, almost shy, and for a brief second his hands stilled on the wires. He realized he had been prepared to find a distant, wealthy client, someone untouchable and detached. Instead, he was looking at a woman who, with a simple crown of paper, had been drawn into a child's world. He returned to his work, but a flicker of something new stayed with him. Madison adjusted the crown on her head and let out a quiet laugh, the sound rusty from disuse. The echo of it filled the room, and for the first time in a long while, the mansion didn't feel entirely empty. Daniel leaned closer to the machine, his shoulders moving rhythmically as he pulled the last piece of the casing free. The air conditioner groaned like an exhausted animal, the fan blades stuttering to a stop before hanging in silence. He exhaled through his teeth, resting his forearm against the frame for a moment before speaking. It's nothing unusual, he said, his tone steady, practical. The motor's burned out. Old part, seen its time. I'll order a replacement, and once it's in, you'll have cool air again. Madison tilted her head, a strand of her blonde hair slipping loose against her cheek. So just bad luck? He nodded. Just bad luck. Machines don't last forever. The words were so simple, but they lingered in the space between them. Bad luck. Machines breaking down. Lives changing without warning. Madison's lips pressed together, not in argument, but in recognition. Her gaze drifted toward the large windows where the horizon shimmered in the Texas heat. When the cooling system fails in my company's server room, it's not just bad luck. It's chaos. Dozens of servers overheating, millions of dollars in contracts at risk, shareholders calling in panic. One tiny part fails, and everything spirals. Daniel straightened slightly, turning toward her. Your company's server room. Hale and North, she replied, her tone quiet but firm. His brows rose in surprise, and then he let out a low laugh, almost incredulous. You're kidding. I was in that server room 2 months ago. They called me in to swap out the cooling units and redo half the piping. Spent 2 days in that freezing maze of machines. Thought I'd never get the hum out of my head. Madison's eyes shifted back to him, sharp at first, then softening. That was you? Yeah. He smiled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. Didn't know I was working in the Queen's castle. For the first time, she laughed, quiet, almost against her will. The sound startled even her, and she covered it with a small shake of her head. Not much of a castle anymore, she said. Daniel looked at her with a different kind of focus now, as though seeing her for more than the woman in the wheelchair, more than the client with a broken unit. He saw someone who knew what it was like to live in a world where the smallest failure could bring everything crashing down. The coincidence hung between them like an invisible thread. She was the CEO whose company he had unknowingly kept running that summer night. He was the mechanic who had been just another name on an invoice. And now, because of a broken motor and a paper crown, their paths had crossed again, this time face to face. Madison adjusted the crown still perched lightly on her head, her fingers brushing the fragile paper. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Maybe machines and people aren't so different, she murmured. One broken part, and everything changes. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded, his dark eyes steady on hers. For a fleeting second, the air between them felt less heavy, less suffocating, as though the silence of the mansion had given way to something entirely new. That night, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table in his modest apartment, the toolbox open, beside him. The day had stretched long, the heat following him even here, though the rattling old fan in the corner tried its best to keep the air moving. He rolled his sleeves up, hands smudged with grease, and began sorting through the scattered sockets, wrenches, and spare screws he had tossed in carelessly after the job at Madison's house. Lily climbed onto a chair across from him, her legs swinging restlessly. She always loved watching him work, though she didn't quite understand what he did. To her, every piece of metal was a toy waiting to be named. Tonight was no different. She leaned forward, peering into the box as though it were a treasure chest. "Daddy, what's this one?" she asked, holding up a battered wrench. "That's a half-inch spanner. Be careful, it's heavy. And this?" She picked up a washer and squinted at it. "That's just a washer, baby." Not very exciting. She kept digging, her small fingers moving through bolts and wires until something caught the dim kitchen light. Her hand froze. Slowly, she pulled it free, her eyes going wide. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed. "A shiny thing!" Daniel turned, expecting another piece of scrap metal, but his heart stilled when he saw what she was holding. It wasn't a bolt or a washer. It was a flash drive, sleek, black, with the silver logo of Hale and North stamped neatly on the side. He reached across the table and carefully took it from her, turning it over in his palm. Memories clicked into place. 2 months ago, that freezing server room, the endless cables and blinking lights, the sound of fans roaring like wind. He had been exhausted, tools scattered everywhere, and in the rush to finish, he must have scooped the drive into his box without even noticing. Daniel felt a prickle of unease. Flash drives in a corporate server room weren't just lying around for no reason. He glanced at Lily, who was watching him with open curiosity, then back at the object in his hand. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. "In your box," she said, grinning. "It was hiding." He hesitated. Part of him wanted to toss it back into the toolbox and forget about it. But another part, the part that had seen Madison's tired eyes, had heard the way her voice cracked when she talked about responsibility and loss, couldn't ignore it. Daniel pushed his laptop toward him, the screen flickering to life. Lily leaned closer, resting her chin on her hands as if she knew something important was about to happen. With a deep breath, he plugged the flash drive in. The computer whirred, and within seconds, a set of folders appeared on the screen. Reports, financial spreadsheets, email archives. He clicked one at random, and his eyes widened. It wasn't routine data. It was evidence. Detailed transactions, hidden transfers to offshore accounts, forged signatures. The further he scrolled, the colder his stomach became. The numbers weren't small, and the name attached to the cover-ups was one he recognized from Madison's offhand comment earlier. Randall Dower, her chief financial officer. The files painted a picture too clear to ignore. Millions siphoned away, fraudulent reports, and all of it structured so that blame could fall neatly onto Madison, the absent CEO recovering from her accident. Daniel sat back, the weight of what he'd uncovered pressing hard on his chest. He glanced at Lily, who was fiddling with a pencil, oblivious to the magnitude of what she had uncovered with her small hands. "It's not just shiny," he murmured to himself. "It's dangerous." The tiny drive, lost and forgotten in a mechanic's toolbox, might hold the proof Madison needed to reclaim her life. And as Daniel closed the laptop, he realized he was holding far more than a piece of plastic. He was holding the beginning of something that could change everything. The next afternoon, the air was heavy with the promise of rain, clouds gathering in a gray mass over the horizon as Daniel pulled his old pickup truck into the long driveway of Madison's mansion. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. The flash drive felt like it weighed 10 pounds in his pocket, though it was no larger than his thumb. He had turned the decision over all night. Leave it alone, throw it back in the toolbox, pretend he had never seen it. But every time he tried to convince himself, Madison's face returned to him. The forced smile, the faint bitterness in her voice when she spoke about luck and breakdowns, the way her eyes betrayed something deeper than physical pain. Lily had begged to come along, but this time Daniel had left her with the neighbor. He didn't know what he was walking into, and he didn't want his daughter anywhere near it. Now standing at Madison's front door with the laptop case slung over his shoulder, he felt almost foolish, like a man bringing scraps of metal to a queen. But he rang the bell anyway. When Madison opened the door, she looked surprised. Her hair was down today, loose against her shoulders, her expression guarded. "Mr. Rivera," she said, formal out of habit. "Back so soon? The part for the unit won't arrive for another week." "It's not about the unit," Daniel replied, his voice lower than he meant it to be. "I found something. I think it belongs to you." She hesitated, suspicion flickering in her eyes, but then nodded and wheeled back, gesturing for him to enter. The house was cooler now, with temporary fans running, but still carried that heavy silence that always seemed to hang in the air. Daniel set the laptop bag on the dining table and pulled out the flash drive. Madison's gaze sharpened the moment she saw the Hale and North logo. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice suddenly sharper, more alive. He explained quickly how he had been called in to work on the server room, how the drive must have slipped into his toolbox, how Lily had discovered it. As he spoke, Madison's hands tightened against the armrests of her chair. She said nothing, only gestured toward the laptop. "Show me," she said. Daniel slotted the drive into place, the screen flickering to life. Folders appeared instantly. Reports Q3 to Q4, transactions, private memos. His stomach knotted as he opened one at random, spreadsheets scrolling across the display. Madison leaned forward, her breath catching audibly. "These are internal audits," she whispered. "I signed these myself. But the numbers, they've been altered." She grabbed the mouse with unsteady fingers, opening file after file. Emails surfaced, chains of correspondence stamped with Randall Dower's name. Each one carefully worded, yet together they told a clear story. Money funneled into offshore accounts, costs manipulated, balances shifted, all in ways that pointed back to her, the absent CEO who had been too broken to defend herself. Her face grew paler with each click. At last, she let her hand drop into her lap, staring blankly at the screen. "I knew he was stealing," she said hoarsely, "but I couldn't prove it. After the accident, I lost more than my legs. I lost control." The board whispered about my condition. Randall smiled and made promises while he bled the company dry. And I sat here, powerless. Daniel felt an ache in his chest he couldn't quite name. He was just a mechanic, a man who kept machines alive long enough to keep paying rent. Yet here he was, sitting across from a woman who had once commanded boardrooms and empires, now trembling in her own house because the world had written her off. "You're not powerless," he said quietly. "Not anymore. This," he tapped the side of the laptop, "this is proof, enough to clear your name, maybe enough to put him in prison. But only if you use it." Madison looked up at him then, her brown eyes sharp and vulnerable all at once. For the first time since he had met her, Daniel saw not just the CEO or the woman in the chair, but someone fighting to claw her way back from the edge. Her throat worked as she swallowed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "Yeah," he answered. "It means you get to stop being the victim of his story and start telling your own again." The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It carried weight, the kind that settled deep but also lit a spark. Madison exhaled shakily, her hand brushing against the flash drive as though it were a lifeline. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something dangerous and unfamiliar curl in her chest. Hope Friday arrived with the weight of a storm. The city skyline was still wrapped in gray, a thin drizzle streaking down glass windows as Madison's car pulled up outside the headquarters of Hale and North. The tower loomed above her like an iron judgment, its mirrored facade hiding decades of power, profit, and secrets. She had not set foot inside since the accident. For months she had avoided it, partly because of her injuries, partly because of the whispers that followed her name. Now as Daniel wheeled her through the glass doors, the marble lobby echoed with a silence that seemed to swallow every sound. Employees looked up as she passed. Some startled, some whispered, others avoided her gaze entirely. To them, she was the ghost of the company's golden age, a woman who had built an empire and then been broken by fate. Madison kept her chin high, though her palms sweated against the arms of her chair. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. The boardroom sat at the very top, 30 floors up, with a panoramic view of Houston spread out like a living map. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee. Around the long mahogany table sat a dozen directors in crisp suits, their voices low until she entered. At the head of the table stood Randall Dower, his smile smooth, his cufflinks glinting in the light. He looked every bit the picture of control. "Madison," he said warmly, though the edge in his voice was impossible to miss. "We weren't expecting you. I hope the trip wasn't too difficult." She met his eyes steadily. "I wouldn't miss it." Randall gestured for her to take her place at the table. Though she remained where she was, the wheels of her chair locked firmly in place. He cleared his throat and began speaking to the others, his tone dripping with practiced concern. "As you all know, our CEO has been recovering for some time. We've carried the burden of leadership in her absence. It's become clear that her condition, while tragic, has impaired her ability to serve the company. I think we can all agree the best course of action is a transition of leadership, clean, decisive, for the good of Hale and North." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Madison listened in silence, the words piercing her like tiny blades, but she didn't flinch. Not yet. When Randall finished, she reached into her bag and pulled out the flash drive. The simple plastic object looked almost absurd in her hand, but when she plugged it into the projector at the end of the table, the room shifted. The screen on the wall lit up with rows of numbers, graphs, and signatures. "Before we discuss transitions," Madison said, her voice clear and cold, "I think the board should see this." The first file opened, an audit, doctored to conceal millions siphoned away. The next showed a trail of offshore transfers, each one authorized by Randall's credentials. Then came emails, polite, professional, but damning when read together. Randall's face paled beneath his tan. "This is nonsense," he snapped. "Fabrications, planted data." "Really?" Madison's tone sharpened, her brown eyes blazing. "Because this," she clicked to the next slide, "is a system log. Your login, your timestamps, your IP address. Do you want to claim someone else crawled into your office and stole your identity for 3 years?" The directors leaned forward, their murmurs turning sharp, edged with suspicion. One of them, a silver-haired man who had once been Randall's closest ally, slowly pushed back his chair. "If this is accurate," he said carefully, "then Randall, you've put the company in extraordinary jeopardy." Randall's composure cracked. "You can't trust her," he barked, pointing at Madison. "She hasn't been here. She doesn't know what's been happening. She's not even whole anymore." Daniel, standing quietly against the wall, stepped forward. In his hand was a printed copy of the same log, the metadata trailing across the page in black and white. He laid it on the table. "It's real," he said simply. For a moment, the room fell into stunned silence. Rain tapped steadily against the glass, the city sprawling endlessly below. Finally, one of the directors reached for the phone on the table. His voice was quiet but decisive. "I'm calling our lawyers." And the authorities. Randall surged to his feet, but no one moved to stop the call. His gaze darted around the table, searching for allies, finding none. His smile was gone, replaced with something wild, cornered. Madison remained where she was, steady and unyielding. For the first time since the accident, she felt the full force of who she had been, and still was. Not a victim, not a broken figure to be pitied, but a leader reclaiming her throne. When the security team arrived to escort Randall from the room, Madison turned her chair toward the window. The city stretched before her, alive, chaotic, unstoppable. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged to it again. The days after the board meeting felt different, as though a door that had been sealed for months had finally cracked open. Madison still lived in the same house, still woke up each morning to the quiet ache of her body refusing to obey her. But now there was something else waiting for her each day. The knowledge that she had won a battle no one thought she could fight. Randall was gone, stripped of his power, facing charges that would haunt him for years. For the first time since the accident, Madison felt that she was not entirely powerless. Yet regaining her name in the boardroom was one thing. Reclaiming her body was another. Daniel started coming by more often, sometimes under the pretense of checking the temporary cooling unit, sometimes with tools in his hands, but more and more just to see her. He brought with him small changes that began to reshape her house into something livable again. He installed railings along the hallway, lowered the switches so she could reach them, cleared spaces where the chair always caught. Each adjustment made her house feel less like a cage and more like a place she could move through with dignity. And then there was Lily. The little girl adopted Madison's rehabilitation as if it were a mission only she could supervise. She marched around the living room with the seriousness of a general, giving orders in her tiny voice. "Slow and careful, Miss Madison, just like Daddy fixes the car." She would clap her hands when Madison finished a set of arm stretches, beam with pride when Madison managed to transfer from chair to sofa without wincing. To Lily, progress wasn't measured in medical charts, but in victories that deserved applause. At first, Madison resisted. Every exercise left her exhausted, her muscles screaming, her patience running thin. She hated the trembling of her arms, the weight of her own body that felt foreign and uncooperative. There were nights she wanted to give up, to sink back into the quiet of resignation. But each time she faltered, she caught Daniel's steady gaze, calm, encouraging, never pitying, and Lily's expectant smile, and she forced herself to try again. Weeks passed, and with them came changes so small they were almost invisible. Her balance improved. Her hands steadied on the rails. She felt muscles awaken that she thought had gone forever silent. And then, one evening, it happened. She was gripping the edge of the sofa, sweat dampening her forehead, when she felt it. A flicker, faint but unmistakable. Her toes moved. Just the smallest twitch, but it was real. She froze, eyes wide, afraid it had been her imagination. But then it happened again, stronger this time. A stubborn spark of life refusing to die. The sound that escaped her throat was half sob, half laugh. Daniel, who had been kneeling nearby to steady her, looked up sharply. "What is it?" "My foot," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It moved." "Daniel, it moved." For a heartbeat, he simply stared, as though afraid to believe it. Then his face broke into a smile, genuine and unguarded, the kind that lit his whole expression. "I told you," he said softly. "You're not finished." Lily came running, her paper crown slipping over one ear, and threw her arms around Madison's waist. "I knew it! Queens don't give up," she announced, her small voice ringing with triumph. Madison held on to her tightly, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the moment. It wasn't just the movement of her foot. It was proof that she wasn't trapped forever, that her body hadn't abandoned her completely. It was hope, raw and fierce, rushing back into her veins. That night she lay awake long after Daniel and Lily had left, staring at the ceiling. Her body still ached, her journey was far from over, but for the first time since the accident, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she might still gain. The winter fair spread across the city square, like a dream stitched together with lights. Strings of bulbs hung from lamppost to lamppost, twinkling in the cold night air, while stalls overflowed with roasted chestnuts, candied apples, and steaming cups of cider. The sharp chill carried the scent of cinnamon and pine, a contrast to the stifling heat of the summer when Madison and Daniel had first met. Now the world seemed different, clearer, sharper, alive again. Daniel guided the wheelchair slowly over the cobblestones, careful not to jostle her. Beside him, Lily skipped along, her mittened hands clutching a candy cane almost half her size. She darted from one side of the path to the other, pointing out everything with breathless excitement. The carousel horses painted in gold, the ice-sculpted swans that glittered under the lights, the choir of children singing off-key but with endless chirpawee. Madison felt the bite of the winter air on her cheeks. But for once it wasn't unwelcome. She pulled her scarf tighter, her eyes drinking in every detail. For months she had hidden in her mansion, letting the world move on without her. Tonight, for the first time, she felt part of it again. People passed them, strangers laughing and jostling, and no one stared at her chair with pity. They were too wrapped up in the season, too busy living. It was freeing. They stopped by a booth where Lily insisted on a caramel apple, and Daniel laughed as the sticky treat clung to her gloves. Madison watched the two of them, father and daughter, sharing simple joy. She thought about the life they lived. Messy, imperfect, but full of connection, and something deep inside her ached. Not with loss, but with longing. The music shifted in the square as the brass band began playing a slower tune, and Madison's hand tightened on the arms of her chair. Her heart beat faster. She had been preparing for this moment with Daniel for weeks in the quiet of her house, practicing balance, testing her strength. The twitch in her toes had grown into something more, small movements becoming fragile steps in place. Tonight she wanted to see if she could do more. "Daniel," she said quietly, her breath forming a cloud in the air. "I want to try." He looked down at her, instantly understanding, his expression both protective and encouraging. "Are you sure? It's crowded, and the ground isn't even—" "I'm sure," she interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to try here." Now he nodded once, then gently set the brakes on her chair. Lily's eyes widened as she realized what was happening, her candy apple forgotten. "She's gonna stand up," she squealed, bouncing in place. Daniel moved the walker into position, anchoring it firmly on the stones. Madison gripped the cold metal handles, her palms slick with nervous sweat beneath her gloves. For a moment she couldn't breathe, her legs like lead weights, her mind screaming that she couldn't do it. But then Daniel's hand covered hers, warm and solid. "Slow," he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Just like at home? You've got this." With a deep inhale, Madison pushed down with her arms, drawing on every ounce of strength she had rebuilt. Her body resisted, her muscles trembling. But then, slowly, painfully, she rose. The world tilted, the lights above her spinning, and for a terrifying second she thought she would collapse. Then she steadied, her weight balanced between the walker and her own legs. She was standing. The sound of Lily's cheer pierced the air like a bell. "She's up! Daddy, look, she's up!" The little girl clapped her sticky hands together, jumping up and down. Strangers nearby turned, their faces softening into smiles as they realized what they were witnessing. Madison's breath came ragged, her body shaking, but her heart soared. She took one step forward, then another. The cobblestones felt uneven beneath her feet, but she didn't fall. Each movement was small, awkward, but it was hers. Around her the fair continued. The music, the laughter, the glow of lights. But for Madison, time slowed to a heartbeat, stretching those few steps into eternity. Tears blurred her vision, and she laughed through them, the sound wild and raw. Daniel stayed close, his hand hovering near her back but never pushing, never pulling, only ready to catch her if she faltered. He let her own strength carry her, and Lily ran alongside, shouting encouragement as though she were leading an army. After half a dozen steps, Madison's legs buckled. She sank carefully back into the chair, her chest heaving, her face wet with tears. Daniel crouched in front of her, his dark eyes shining with pride. "You did it," he whispered. "It was only a few steps," she managed, her voice shaking. "It was everything," he corrected gently. Lily clambered into Madison's lap, nearly knocking the paper crown she had been carrying from her pocket. She placed it back on Madison's head, crooked and flimsy, but somehow perfect. "Told you," she said with a grin. "Queens don't give up." Madison wrapped her arms around the child, holding her close, while Daniel's hand rested briefly over hers. The square around them glowed with light, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Madison didn't see herself as broken. She saw herself as alive, standing at the beginning of something new. And in the heart of the winter night, beneath the glitter of 1,000 tiny lights, she finally believed in miracles again. What struck me most while writing their journey is how fragile and strong people can be at the same time. Madison begins as someone who has everything in theory: money, status, influence, but she feels hollow, powerless, trapped in her own home. Daniel, on the other hand, has almost nothing in material terms, only a battered truck and a little girl who depends on him completely. Yet he carries an unshakable strength rooted in love and responsibility. The story becomes powerful not because of the fall of a corrupt CFO, but because three people, two adults scarred by loss and one child who still believes in magic, form something unshakable together. The miracle isn't only Madison standing again at the winter fair. The real miracle is that she rediscovers herself, not through wealth or revenge, but through trust, connection, and the quiet bravery of letting someone in. For me, the ending isn't a full stop. It's a doorway. You can imagine the next morning, the next step, the next board meeting, the next laugh at the kitchen table. That's the real hook. knowing that they have only just begun building a life where strength isn't measured in power or perfection, but in the willingness to keep standing up, again and again, together.